It was a typical, quiet afternoon in a bustling city, the kind where everything seemed to move at its usual pace, until one moment changed everything. The air was crisp, the sound of engines roared in the distance, and the streets were filled with people going about their day. But in one corner of the city, a ruthless biker, notorious for his reckless behavior and disregard for the rules, made an unexpected appearance. This wasn't just any biker. His reputation for causing trouble was well known, and he had an unsettling air about him, one that seemed to make people steer clear when he was around. His heavy leather jacket, adorned with patches of defiance, screamed danger. His eyes, cold and calculating, showed no remorse for anything he did. And on this day, he had a mission: to kick a dog for fun. It started innocently enough, with the dog casually walking along the sidewalk, tail wagging, oblivious to the dark turn its day was about to take. The biker was riding through the street on his loud motorcycle, revving the engine, clearly looking for some sort of thrill. Without warning, he sped up, pulled alongside the dog, and kicked it, hard. The dog yelped in surprise, falling to the ground, completely unprepared for the sudden attack. Onlookers froze, unsure of what to do. The biker didn't care. He laughed it off, speeding away without a second thought, disappearing into the distance as quickly as he had appeared. But what the biker didn't know was that the dog he had kicked wasn't just any ordinary dog. This was no street pup or random stray. This dog had a very famous, very protective owner. An owner known for his kindness, his grace, and his unwavering love for animals. An owner whose name carried weight, and who had a reputation of not letting anything slide, especially when it came to the safety and well-being of those he cared about. That owner, as it would turn out, was none other than Keanu Reeves. Yes, you heard that right. Keanu Reeves, the beloved actor known for his roles in iconic films like The Matrix, John Wick, and Speed, was the dog's owner. A man who is often celebrated not only for his acting skills but also for his kindness off-screen, for his humility, and for his deep love of animals. Keanu was the kind of person who would never stand for such cruelty, and he had no idea that his world was about to collide with that of a man who had no conscience. As news of the incident spread, people began to wonder what would happen when Keanu found out about what had happened to his beloved dog. The biker had no idea who he had just crossed. But that was about to change. The next few moments would set in motion a chain of events that would shake both the biker and Keanu to their course. You could feel the tension in the air as the wheels of fate began to turn, and the world waited with bated breath to see how things would unfold. Would the biker face the consequences of his actions? And how would Keanu, a man who was known for his calm demeanor, handle a situation like this? The stage was set for an incredible showdown, one where justice, loyalty, and perhaps a little bit of vengeance would come into play. But as with any good story, there was still so much to discover. What would happen next? How far would Keanu go to protect his dog? And what would the biker do when he realized he had messed with the wrong person? You might think you know where this story is headed, but trust me, it's far from over. Keep watching as we dive deeper into this wild, suspense-filled tale that will keep you on the edge of your seat. As the story unfolded, the city seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the next move. Keanu, known for his calm and composed demeanor, was not one to overreact, but anyone who knew him well understood that there were lines you just didn't cross. His love for his dog was no secret, and those who saw him out with his pet could tell that it was more than just a companionship, it was a bond, a deep connection that went beyond words. Keanu's phone buzzed with the news. The video had already begun to circulate, the footage of the biker kicking his dog now in the hands of millions. But it wasn't just the video that spread, it was the outrage that followed. Fans of Keanu, animal lovers, and even casual observers felt the weight of the injustice. The biker, unaware of the firestorm he had set off, went about his day as if nothing had changed. But Keanu knew. And now, he had a decision to make. He could have gone down the path of vengeance, anger driving his every move. But that wasn't who Keanu was. He wasn't the type to act on impulse. Instead, he took a quiet moment, reflecting on what had just happened, thinking of the love he had for his dog and how important it was to stay true to his values. But that didn't mean he wasn't going to do something about it. The biker had thought he could get away with something so cruel without facing any consequences. He had no idea who he had offended, who he had crossed. He didn't know that the man he had just wronged had a whole army of loyal fans and friends who would stand behind him, no questions asked. It wasn't just about the dog, it was about what that act represented. It was about standing up for what was right. The next few days were tense. The biker's name began to surface, and it became clear that he wasn't the type to back down. He had his own connections, his own reputation, and he wasn't afraid of a confrontation. But Keanu wasn't the type to let things slide either. A showdown was on the horizon, but no one knew exactly how it would go down. As the days went by, rumors started to swirl. People began to question whether this was going to be a simple confrontation or whether there would be something more. Would Keanu show up in person to confront the biker? Would he take the legal route, or would he rely on his friends to help him settle the score? What everyone didn't expect was the way Keanu decided to handle it. It wasn't the path they had imagined, and it certainly wasn't going to be as simple as anyone thought. No, Keanu had something else in mind, a plan that would not only teach the biker a lesson but send a message to anyone who thought they could get away with cruelty. So, what would happen next? Would the biker finally realize the gravity of his actions? And how would Keanu's decision change the course of everything? Stay tuned, because the next chapter of this story promises to be more thrilling and unexpected than anyone could have predicted. The biker was about to find out that the consequences of his actions were far bigger than he could have ever imagined. And Keanu? Well, let's just say he was ready to take matters into his own hands in a way that no one saw coming. The news of the incident spread like wildfire. The video of the biker kicking Keanu Reeves' dog had been shared across social media platforms, drawing the attention of thousands of people. The outrage was immediate, with fans of Keanu and animal lovers alike demanding justice for the dog. Keanu, known for his roles in action-packed movies, was not someone who was easily rattled. In fact, he was the kind of person who always tried to stay calm, no matter the situation. But this was different. The bond between Keanu and his dog was something deeply personal, and this attack wasn't just an assault on an animal, it felt like a violation of something sacred to him. Keanu's dog, a gentle rescue pup named Bear, had been a part of his life for years. The two were inseparable. Whether Keanu was attending events, taking long walks in the park, or simply relaxing at home, Bear was always by his side. Their connection was evident to anyone who saw them together, the way Bear would nuzzle up to Keanu, or the way Keanu would look down at his dog with affection. It was clear that Keanu treated Bear as family, not just a pet. So when a video of the incident surfaced, showing the biker's cruel and senseless kick, it struck a chord with everyone who knew the kind of man Keanu was. But what made this situation even more complicated was that Keanu didn't immediately take to social media to vent his frustration, as many people expected. Instead, he stayed quiet, almost eerily so. He didn't address the incident directly in public, and his fans couldn't help but wonder why. Was he too upset to speak? Was he planning something more serious? Or was he just letting the world simmer in anticipation, knowing that when he did speak, it would be something unforgettable? Meanwhile, the biker was oblivious to the storm he had unleashed. His name, Kyle Morgan, didn't mean much to the general public, but now it was on everyone's radar. Known for his reckless behavior, Morgan was the kind of person who thrived on attention, and often got it by pushing the limits of what was acceptable. He had a reputation in certain circles for being tough, unafraid to take risks, and enjoying the thrill of shocking others. To him, kicking the dog was just another way to assert his dominance, a petty act of cruelty that would bring some laughter from his friends. But what he didn't realize was that this time, he had pushed the wrong buttons. Kyle hadn't anticipated the backlash he was about to face. His actions had stirred something much deeper than a simple outcry for animal cruelty. This wasn't just about the dog anymore, it was about respect, about crossing a line that should never have been crossed. As the story gained traction, more and more people began to demand answers. Keanu's loyal fan base, which had always admired his down-to-earth nature and his kind-hearted persona, was now on high alert. They rallied together, posting messages of support for Keanu and urging him to take action. At first, Kyle thought it would blow over. After all, he had done things far worse in the past, and people had forgotten about them quickly. This time, however, the situation felt different. Every time he opened his phone, he was met with a flood of angry messages, memes, and even threats. It was as if the entire internet had turned against him. But there was one thing he didn't know: Keanu wasn't like the other celebrities who would simply brush it off or ignore the situation. Keanu Reeves was a man of principle, and he wasn't about to let this slide. For days, the media speculated about what Keanu would do next. Some thought he would go the legal route, filing a lawsuit against Kyle for the attack on his dog. Others wondered if he might confront the biker directly, bringing his calm and measured demeanor to the scene in a way that would leave no room for doubt about the severity of what had happened. There were even rumors that Keanu might enlist the help of some of his famous friends, including fellow actors and fellow dog lovers, to take a stand. But despite all the chatter, Keanu remained silent. The world waited, holding its breath, wondering what would happen next. Behind closed doors, Keanu was processing everything. He had always been a man of action, someone who didn't need to make a spectacle out of his personal life. But this was different. The video had shown a cruel act that seemed so senseless, so unprovoked, that Keanu couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this than just a random act of violence. It wasn't just about the physical harm done to Bear, it was about the underlying message of disrespect. Keanu wasn't one to jump to conclusions, but he knew one thing for sure: this wasn't going to go unanswered. Meanwhile, Kyle's life was slowly starting to unravel. The biker's usual haunts were no longer safe. He had once been able to get away with his antics without much consequence, but now it seemed like the entire world had him in its sights. He had underestimated the power of the internet, and now his actions were haunting him. People were sending him messages, calling him out for his cruelty, and warning him that he had crossed a line he couldn't uncross. Kyle's friends, the same ones who had once laughed off his reckless behavior, were starting to distance themselves. They didn't want to be associated with him anymore. Even some of his closest allies began to see the impact of what he had done. Kyle tried to brush it off, but the weight of the situation was starting to sink in. He had no idea how much of a target he had become. People who had never heard of him before now recognized his face, thanks to the viral video. And as much as he wanted to ignore the fallout, he couldn't escape the feeling that something big was coming, something he wasn't prepared for. But what could he do? He wasn't afraid of Keanu Reeves. Or so he thought. As the days dragged on, tensions continued to rise. Keanu's fans waited for some sort of response, some indication that the actor was ready to take action. Meanwhile, Kyle remained in a state of denial, convincing himself that he could ride out the storm. But as each day passed, the pressure mounted. Kyle began to realize that his usual tactics of tough talk and bravado weren't going to work this time. Something bigger was at play, and he wasn't prepared for it. The world was watching, waiting for the next move. Would Keanu take the high road and seek legal action? Or would he confront Kyle face to face? The tension continued to build, and the answers seemed to grow further out of reach. But one thing was certain: whatever happened next, It was going to be a moment no one would forget. The tension between Keanu Reeves and Kyle Morgan had reached a boiling point. The world was waiting, on edge, as each day seemed to stretch out longer than the last. It wasn't just a matter of the dog anymore. The incident had tapped into something deeper, something primal in both the fans who rallied behind Keanu and in Kyle, who was beginning to understand the gravity of what he had done. Keanu, known for his stoic silence in the face of adversity, had never been one to indulge in public spectacle. He wasn't the type to lash out on social media or take his personal matters to the press. But the more time passed, the more he could feel the mounting pressure. The feeling of helplessness, of watching his dog, his family, suffer in the wake of Kyle's mindless cruelty, gnawed at him. It wasn't just about the immediate physical pain Bear had endured, it was about the larger message. Keanu wasn't a man who sought confrontation, but there was something about this act, this blatant disrespect for life, that stirred a sense of justice within him. Everywhere Keanu went, people looked at him. Eyes filled with sympathy, hope, and some, dare he say it, expectation. They wanted him to do something. They wanted him to take action. To send a message that no one, not even someone as reckless and dangerous as Kyle Morgan, could get away with hurting the innocent. Keanu could feel their eyes on him, waiting for him to do something grand, something that would give them closure. But what did closure even look like in a situation like this? Keanu wasn't a vigilante, despite what his movie roles might suggest. The real world was more complex. It was messy, and answers weren't always clear. He didn't want to be seen as someone who used his fame or power to punish those who crossed him. Yet, he could not stand idly by while his beloved dog bore the emotional scars of an act so senseless and cruel. Meanwhile, Kyle's world continued to spiral. At first, he had tried to shrug off the consequences of his actions, but the relentless backlash from the public was something he wasn't used to. He had always been the one who instilled fear in others, the one who got the last laugh. But now, every conversation, every encounter, felt like a quiet judgment. Even his closest friends were turning their backs on him. The things he once found amusing, his reckless stunts, his ability to stir the pot, were no longer funny to anyone. He could feel it in the air. Something was closing in on him, and he didn't know how to stop it. Kyle hadn't anticipated the ripple effect that such a small, thoughtless action could cause. He had thought it would be like any other stunt, a quick thrill, a laugh with his friends, and then on to the next. But now he had become a symbol of cruelty. The whole world was looking at him, and for the first time, he felt exposed, vulnerable. People had always feared him, but now, it was as if the very thing he had built his identity on had turned against him. At night, when he was alone, he replayed the events in his mind. He could still see the dog's eyes, wide with shock as it hit the pavement. He could hear its yelp of pain. The biker in him had brushed it off quickly, but the man in him couldn't escape the lingering image. It haunted him, gnawed at him in a way nothing else ever had. He tried to push it away, to focus on other things, but the more he tried, the harder it became. And then there was the looming question, what would Keanu do next? Kyle had heard the rumors, the whispers about how Keanu was a man of great integrity, someone who never forgot when someone wronged him. And although Kyle had once mocked the Hollywood stars who lived under the scrutiny of the public eye, he had a sneaking suspicion that Keanu wasn't someone who would let this go easily. Kyle wasn't naive. He knew that Keanu had the resources, the support, and the moral standing to make his life a living hell. The thought of being taken down by someone he had never even imagined crossing paths with was slowly starting to sink in. He had poked the wrong bear, and now that bear was ready to fight back. Keanu's silence was becoming unbearable. To the public, it seemed as though he was simply biding his time, preparing for the right moment to strike. But what if it wasn't a moment of action that Keanu was waiting for? What if he was simply letting the pressure build, letting it simmer beneath the surface until the time was right? The uncertainty made it all the more frightening. Every move Kyle made, every decision he took, was now clouded by the looming shadow of Keanu's potential retribution. The media, always hungry for a story, had started to spin wild theories. Some suggested that Keanu would take matters into his own hands, that he might show up at Kyle's doorstep to confront him face to face. Others thought it was more likely that Keanu would take the legal route, making a public example of Kyle through the court system. People even speculated that Keanu might rally a group of celebrity friends, those with a similar love for animals, to speak out together and demand justice. But there was one thing that everyone seemed to overlook: Keanu's ability to surprise. He wasn't predictable, not in the way people thought. His calm demeanor, his quiet nature, made him an enigma. He could act in ways that no one saw coming, and that made him all the more dangerous. As days turned into weeks, the pressure mounted for both men. Keanu's thoughts were clouded with conflicting emotions. Anger, yes, but also a sense of responsibility. He had always believed in doing the right thing, in standing up for the vulnerable. But what was the right thing here? To make a spectacle of his own pain and grief? To seek vengeance? Or was there another way, one that didn't rely on anger, one that could send a message of compassion, of strength through calm? Meanwhile, Kyle's frustration reached a boiling point. He could feel his life unraveling, piece by piece. He tried to keep up appearances, acting like nothing had changed, but every conversation felt like it was laced with suspicion. The weight of his actions was starting to crush him, and he could no longer escape the consequences of his cruelty. In the shadows, something was brewing. Both men, despite their differences, were inching closer to a confrontation. And when it came, no one knew who would come out on top, or how it would change everything. The stakes were higher than anyone realized, and the world watched, waiting for the next move. The tension between Keanu Reeves and Kyle Morgan was palpable, like a storm just before it breaks. Everyone around them seemed to sense it too, the air thick with anticipation, as if something monumental was about to unfold. For weeks, Keanu's silence had been like a slow-burning fuse, and now it was clear that the inevitable explosion was drawing near. The world was watching, waiting to see what Keanu would do next. No one, not even Kyle, could deny the weight of the moment. Keanu had kept his cards close to his chest, but every move he made, every decision he took, seemed deliberate, calculated. He wasn't just reacting, he was planning. What had started as an outrage over his dog's mistreatment had become something far bigger, a test of his values, his beliefs about justice, and how far he was willing to go to defend those he loved. Keanu had always been a man of peace, known for his quiet strength and measured response to the chaos of the world. But now, there was a quiet fire inside him that no one could ignore. Behind closed doors, Keanu had taken the time to consider every possible approach. He could go after Kyle legally, take him to court, make a public spectacle of the biker's cruelty. But Keanu wasn't sure if that was enough. The idea of making the situation a circus, of letting it spiral into something bigger than it needed to be, didn't sit right with him. He wasn't interested in punishing Kyle for the sake of revenge. What he wanted, what he needed, was something that would hold Kyle accountable in a way that couldn't be ignored. Keanu wasn't just looking for justice for Bear, he was looking to send a message. And Kyle? He had become a man on the edge. The once reckless biker had started to crack under the pressure of the public backlash. He had spent his entire life avoiding responsibility, dodging consequences for his actions. But now, it felt like the walls were closing in on him. The whispers had turned into accusations. Every time he stepped out into the world, people recognized him, not as a tough guy, not as the reckless troublemaker he used to be, but as the man who had kicked a dog for fun. The shame of it gnawed at him, and with each passing day, his paranoia grew. He had always been in control, but now he was losing his grip. Despite his growing fear, Kyle continued to act with the bravado he was known for. He tried to brush it off, putting on a tough exterior, but inside, he was spiraling. Every message, every call, every glance from a stranger sent a shiver down his spine. His friends had begun to pull away, and he was starting to feel like an outcast in his own world. He knew he had crossed a line, but the more he thought about it, the more he regretted it. The pressure was relentless. He had made a mistake, a huge one, but he couldn't undo it. Now, the question loomed, what would Keanu do? Would the quiet actor finally come for him, or was he just playing the long game, waiting for the right moment to strike? The media frenzy surrounding the incident had only intensified. Speculation about Keanu's next move spread like wildfire, with everyone from fans to journalists offering their own theories. Would Keanu show up at Kyle's doorstep? Would he confront him in front of the cameras, in front of the world? Or would he seek a more personal form of retribution, something that Kyle would never see coming? People were desperate to know how it would end. The stage was set for a confrontation, but no one could predict how it would play out. Keanu, for all his calm and introspection, was aware of the pressure mounting. Every day that passed without a public statement, without some form of resolution, only seemed to fuel the speculation. He knew it wouldn't be long before Kyle, who had already started to feel the heat, would make his move. And Keanu was ready. But he wasn't in a rush. He wasn't acting out of anger or desperation. He had something bigger in mind, something that would make the world see what it meant to cross a line, to hurt the innocent. As the days passed, a strange sense of inevitability filled the air. The whole world seemed to be waiting for the final act. People couldn't help but wonder how far Keanu would go to protect his dog, his family. Would he break his silence? Would he make the world feel the consequences of Kyle's actions? Or would he show a level of restraint that no one expected, leaving everyone stunned by the power of his actions? Kyle's anxiety was at its peak now. He could feel the weight of the world on his shoulders. There was nowhere to hide. Every move he made seemed to be scrutinized. And he knew that the moment was coming. Keanu was preparing for something, and it was only a matter of time before their paths collided. Kyle wasn't sure what to expect, but the fear was gnawing at him now, inescapable. His bravado had faded, replaced by a cold sweat. The silence that had surrounded Keanu for so long had finally reached its breaking point. In a quiet meeting with his closest friends, Keanu made his decision. He wasn't going to let the world dictate his actions. He wasn't going to play by anyone else's rules. But how would he make his statement? What could he do that would send the clearest message without descending into chaos? Keanu didn't want a public spectacle, he wanted something that would leave a lasting impression on both Kyle and the world at large. The tension had reached its peak. Keanu's next move would be the one that defined everything. And Kyle, for all his bravado, knew that his time was running out. The world was watching. The question was no longer just about justice for the dog, it was about a reckoning for Kyle, about facing the consequences of his actions in a way he could never have imagined. It was only a matter of time before everything came to a head. The moment everyone had been waiting for was on the horizon, and neither man knew how it would all end. But whatever happened next, it was sure to leave a mark. As the world held its breath, waiting for Keanu's next move, an unexpected development sent shockwaves through the narrative. Just when it seemed like the tension between him and Kyle Morgan was about to reach its breaking point, something happened that no one could have predicted, a twist that changed everything. It was early morning when the news broke. Keanu, having stayed mostly out of the spotlight, suddenly found himself in the center of a new media frenzy. A police report surfaced, one that seemed completely unrelated to the original incident. But as the details emerged, it quickly became clear that the situation had just taken an even darker turn. The report stated that Kyle Morgan had been found unconscious, lying in the middle of a deserted street. His motorcycle had been abandoned nearby, its engines still running. The report mentioned no signs of a struggle and no obvious cause for his state, but there were indications of foul play. A few disturbing details raised more questions than answers. Kyle's phone had been wiped clean of all data, and, most alarmingly, there was a cryptic note found on him. It read simply, "This is just the beginning." The media exploded with speculation. Was this some sort of retaliation? Was Kyle's life now at risk from someone connected to Keanu, someone who had had enough of his cruelty? Or was it something else entirely? People were quick to connect the dots, imagining that Keanu, finally enraged by the treatment of his beloved dog, had decided to take matters into his own hands. The pressure on Keanu grew exponentially, and the world's eyes were fixed on him as the primary suspect. But Keanu, calm and collected as always, remained silent, offering no response to the swirling rumors. The timing of the incident only deepened the mystery. Kyle's fall from grace had been swift, and now, with the threat looming over him, it seemed that his already fragile world was shattering at an even faster pace. In the blink of an eye, the battle over a single act of animal cruelty had turned into something much larger, something far more dangerous. Was this an orchestrated act of vengeance? Was Kyle being dragged into something much more sinister, something he had no control over? Keanu's fans, many of whom had once rallied behind him in support of his dog, now began to question everything. Was he involved? Was there a deeper motive behind his stoic silence? Could Keanu, a man known for his kindness and humility, have done something so extreme? And if not Keanu, then who? The questions only multiplied as the police investigation into Kyle's mysterious condition began to heat up. The more the authorities uncovered, the stranger the case became. No one could find a clear connection between Keanu and the attack, but there were rumors circulating that someone had been keeping tabs on Kyle for months, someone with a very personal vendetta against him. Kyle, for his part, had no memory of what had happened to him. When he woke up in the hospital, disoriented and weak, the police were already asking questions, but his answers were fragmented, his mind clouded with confusion. His motorcycle, his phone, and the note, all pieces of a puzzle that didn't seem to fit together. Was he being targeted by someone who had a personal grudge against him? Was this connected to the dog incident, or was it something deeper, something even darker? As the days passed, the investigation into Kyle's mysterious attack took on a life of its own. With every new piece of evidence, the case became more complex, more entangled. The public's focus was no longer solely on Keanu or even Kyle, it was on the larger, more troubling question of who was behind this cryptic message, and what their true intentions were. But the story didn't stop there. As the investigation deepened, a new lead emerged. It was discovered that Kyle had been involved in something far worse than anyone had realized, a dangerous underworld of criminals, a group of individuals whose reach extended far beyond his small world of reckless stunts. Kyle had always thought of himself as a tough guy, someone who thrived in the shadows, but now it seemed he had gotten in over his head. The authorities were uncovering connections to a series of unsolved crimes, including a recent string of mysterious disappearances, and it all pointed to a larger, more dangerous operation. Keanu, meanwhile, remained a figure of curiosity. The media painted him as the hero, the one wronged by the cruel biker, but the mounting suspicion surrounding him cast a shadow over his reputation. Was he somehow involved in this new, twisted turn of events? Keanu's silence was starting to feel like more than just a lack of response. His reluctance to speak out, to clear his name, only fueled the growing tension. Was it possible that Keanu had been involved in a darker world, one that even his fans couldn't have imagined? With the stakes escalating rapidly, both Keanu and Kyle were caught in a web they hadn't anticipated. Kyle's past was catching up with him in ways he hadn't foreseen, and Keanu, for all his quiet strength, was now entangled in a situation much more complicated than the original dog attack. The question of who was behind Kyle's attack loomed larger than ever, and as the investigation unfolded, it became clear that the answer was not as simple as anyone had first thought. The real story, it seemed, had only just begun. With the dark undercurrents swirling around both men, no one knew who would come out on top, or who was pulling the strings behind the scenes. The tension was now more than just about a dog or a single act of cruelty, it was about the unraveling of a much larger and more dangerous game. And as the investigation continued, the web of mystery tightened, with each revelation pushing Keanu and Kyle toward an inevitable confrontation that no one could predict. As the investigation intensified, the tension reached a boiling point. The city buzzed with whispers and rumors, everyone trying to piece together the truth behind Kyle's mysterious attack. Keanu had kept to his silence, but now the world was starting to demand answers. The police had been relentless, following every lead, digging into Kyle's past, and slowly unraveling the tangled mess of his associations. And then, as if by fate, the final pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. It started with a simple lead that felt almost like an afterthought at first. The police had traced the phone records from Kyle's mobile before it was wiped clean. A few numbers stood out, unfamiliar names, mysterious calls from a private number. One of those calls had been placed just hours before Kyle was found unconscious on the street. The investigation had barely touched on it when they realized the source. It was a call from Keanu's security team, the very same night Kyle was attacked. At first, the revelation was as confusing as it was unsettling. Why would Keanu's team be involved in something so sinister? Was it possible that Keanu had been more involved in the underworld than anyone could have imagined? But as they dug deeper, the truth began to reveal itself. The security team had been tracking Kyle's movements for weeks, not because Keanu was after him, but because Keanu had received disturbing threats. Someone had been threatening Keanu, promising to hurt what he loved most. It wasn't just a one-off incident with the dog anymore. This was about something much larger. It turned out that Kyle, whether by accident or intent, had become entangled with the people who had been targeting Keanu from the shadows, dangerous criminals who had a score to settle with the actor. Kyle, ever the thrill-seeker, had unwittingly become a pawn in their game. The bikers, who had seen him as an easy target for their criminal activities, had been using him to get to Keanu. They'd figured out that if they could push the actor into a corner, if they could make him respond in anger or desperation, they might finally get what they wanted from him. But when Keanu's security team caught wind of the danger, they acted swiftly and decisively. They hadn't attacked Kyle, they had simply warned him. The cryptic note found on Kyle had been part of a strategy to scare him off, not to harm him. The police report about the incident was all wrong. Kyle hadn't been attacked by someone close to Keanu, but by those who had been targeting Keanu for months. It wasn't about revenge for the dog. It was about the larger game at play, a dark conspiracy that no one had seen coming. The shocking twist was not that Keanu had orchestrated Kyle's downfall, but that Kyle had been a victim in this larger scheme. The entire time, Kyle had thought he was just a pawn in a petty rivalry. But he was now realizing he was nothing more than a bystander in something much bigger, a victim of circumstances far beyond his control. His motorcycle accident, his mysterious note, even his own suffering, it was all part of a larger strategy designed to unsettle Keanu, to push him to the edge. When Keanu finally spoke out publicly, his calm demeanor took on a new sense of authority. He didn't offer apologies or grand speeches. Instead, he simply shared what had truly happened, the truth about the threats against him and the web of criminals behind the scenes. He spoke of his love for his dog, Bear, and how the threats to his family had pushed him to act, but how it had never been about vengeance. It was about protecting the people he loved, about standing up to forces that wanted to hurt them all. The world was stunned. The public's perception of the entire ordeal was flipped on its head. Keanu was no longer just a victim of Kyle's cruelty. He had been a target in a much larger, more dangerous scheme that had nearly gone unnoticed. The police quickly moved to arrest the criminals behind the operation, individuals who had used Kyle as a pawn without him even knowing it. The whole biker gang, once seen as a group of untouchables, was being dismantled one by one. But just when it seemed like the story was coming to a close, there was one last shocking twist. As the authorities moved to arrest the mastermind behind the operation, they discovered something even more unexpected. Keanu's own security team had been infiltrated. One of the men who had been closest to him, someone who had earned Keanu's trust, had been secretly working with the criminals all along. The betrayal ran deeper than anyone had anticipated. The very people Keanu had relied on to protect him had been feeding information to those who wanted to bring him down. This final revelation sent shockwaves through Keanu's life. It was not just the criminals he had to contend with, but a sense of betrayal from within his own circle. The trust he had placed in those around him had been shattered, and he now had to grapple with the reality of having been surrounded by deception for far longer than he had realized. The person he had relied on most had been the one responsible for allowing the chaos to escalate in the first place. As for Kyle, he was left in the wreckage of a life he never understood. The bikers, the criminals, had taken more from him than he could have ever imagined. He had been a player in a game he didn't know existed, and now he was left to pick up the pieces of his own life. The revelation that he was, in fact, a victim in this tangled mess came too late to offer him any real redemption. His past actions, his cruelty toward the dog, still loomed over him, and no amount of revelation could erase what he had done. In the end, the story came to a head with Keanu finally finding peace. His dog Bear, recovering from the trauma, remained a symbol of his love and commitment to protecting those he cared about. Kyle, however, was left with the harsh truth about the dark forces that had used him, and the life he had lived before all of this seemed like a distant, irrelevant memory. The world had witnessed a battle that wasn't just about a dog or a single act of cruelty. It had been about betrayal, deception, and the lengths people would go to destroy someone. Keanu had been tested in ways no one expected, and in the end, it was his ability to see the truth, to stay calm amidst the chaos, that allowed him to find the resolution he needed. But as the dust settled, the final twist left everyone with a lingering question: how well do we really know the people closest to us? As the investigation into the criminal ring continued, Keanu found himself facing a period of intense reflection. His world had shifted in ways he never anticipated. The dog attack that had seemed like the catalyst for all of this, the event that had so drastically altered the course of his life, was now only a small piece of a much larger puzzle. Keanu had always kept his personal life under wraps, but the fallout from the public scrutiny had forced him to confront not only the men who had targeted him, but also the people he trusted the most. The arrest of the infiltrator within his security team sent shockwaves through his world. The betrayal stung deeply. Someone who had been by his side for years, someone he had considered family, had been part of the very criminal network that had caused so much turmoil. Keanu, though shaken, knew that the next step was to rebuild. His security was now being restructured, with only the most trusted members remaining. He understood that trust was fragile, and it would take time to restore it fully. But he was determined to move forward, to protect the ones he loved and to ensure that nothing like this would ever happen again. In the aftermath, Keanu was approached by reporters, but he chose to remain private. His silence, though once a symbol of strength, was now a reminder of the toll this journey had taken on him. He hadn't sought fame or attention, he had only wanted justice for Bear. Now, justice had been served, not in the way most people expected, but in a way that held a deeper, more meaningful truth. Keanu was not just a victim of a senseless act of violence. He had faced a web of deception, a world of darkness he had never truly understood, and he had emerged stronger, wiser, and more resolved than ever. As for Kyle, the aftermath of the story was far less clear. He had never fully realized the gravity of the forces surrounding him until it was too late. The police had cleared him of any involvement with the criminal gang, but his reputation, damaged by his actions toward Bear and now forever linked to this larger conspiracy, would never be the same. Kyle didn't have the luxury of ignoring his past. His criminal connections, which had once seemed like nothing more than a means to an end, had now painted him as someone who had been in the wrong place at the wrong time, but the damage to his life was undeniable. The public backlash for his treatment of Bear had initially seemed like a momentary storm, but now it was a stain on his character that would follow him forever. No one could forget the image of him kicking a helpless dog for sport. And despite the fact that Kyle had been caught in a much bigger mess, his actions had left an indelible mark. He tried to move forward, but it was clear that his past, particularly the cruelty toward Bear, would be something he would always have to answer for. The man who had once been reckless and carefree was now a cautionary tale. In the end, Kyle couldn't outrun the consequences of his actions. For Bear, there was a sense of calm and healing. The dog had been through so much, and though the trauma of that day remained, Bear found comfort in the home that Keanu had carefully built for him. There was no rushing the healing process, but Bear was surrounded by love, and that was enough. Keanu took extra care to ensure that his dog had the best life possible from that point forward. And Bear, with his gentle soul, seemed to understand that Keanu would always be there to protect him, just as he had been before. The final resolution, however, was not just about what had happened or who was to blame. It was about the choices people made when they were faced with the truth. Keanu had chosen the path of integrity, even when it meant facing uncomfortable realities. He had shown strength not through violent retaliation but through his calm, collected response to the chaos. He had seen through the lies and the web of deceit that surrounded him, and ultimately, that clarity had won out. His actions not only brought justice to his dog but also exposed a much larger network of criminals who had been operating in the shadows for far too long. Keanu's quiet resilience had turned the tide. Kyle, on the other hand, was left to grapple with the weight of his decisions. He had been part of something that he couldn't fully understand, but now, as the dust settled, he realized that the cruelty toward Bear had been his first step down a path that would eventually lead him here. While he didn't deserve the dangers that had befallen him, he also couldn't escape the harsh truth of his own actions. The world had moved on. But Kyle had to live with the consequences. It wasn't just about the dog anymore. It was about a pattern of choices that had led him to a crossroads. As for Keanu, the saga wasn't something he was eager to relive. But through it all, he had grown. The strength it took to navigate the complexities of betrayal, deception, and public scrutiny had reinforced the core values he had always held. He hadn't sought fame or glory through this ordeal. Instead, he had used his platform to bring awareness to the dangers that lurked in the world, forces that could destroy lives in ways no one ever anticipated. Keanu's reputation remained intact, not because of his fame, but because of his unwavering commitment to doing the right thing. He had chosen to stand up for what was right, and in the end, that made all the difference. The final takeaway was clear. The story was not about revenge. It was about resilience, accountability, and the complex choices that shape our lives. Keanu had proven that strength came not from how loud one could roar, but from how quietly one could endure and rise above. Kyle, in the end, was a reminder that our past actions, whether small or large, always have consequences, and that redemption often requires much more than just time. The world moved on, but the lessons lingered. Keanu's story, the story of a man, a dog, and the forces that tried to tear them apart, became a story about courage in the face of adversity. It was a reminder that even in the most difficult circumstances, the truth, when pursued with integrity, could prevail. The saga might have ended, but its impact would last much longer. As the months passed and the dust began to settle, the public fascination with the case started to fade. Keanu's life gradually returned to a semblance of normalcy. He returned to his work, focusing on his acting career and the projects he was passionate about. But the events surrounding the dog, Kyle Morgan, and the dangerous criminal network that had targeted him were never truly far from his mind. Keanu kept a low profile, avoiding unnecessary media attention. His primary focus was his dog, Bear, who had been a symbol of everything Keanu valued: loyalty, protection, and unconditional love. With the past behind them, Keanu spent time healing, not just emotionally, but in the quiet, day-to-day moments with Bear that had brought him peace even in the darkest times. Bear had become more than just a companion, he had become a reminder of what truly mattered. But Keanu had learned a harsh lesson during the chaos. Even when you think you've identified all the threats, even when the dust seems to have settled, life can still surprise you. The police had closed their investigation into the biker gang and Kyle's involvement with them, but a lingering question remained unanswered: how deep did the conspiracy go, and who else was involved? As time went on, the authorities continued to follow up on smaller leads, and a breakthrough finally came from an unexpected source. One of Kyle's former associates, a low-level member of the gang, had turned state's witness. Under pressure from law enforcement, this individual revealed the final piece of the puzzle: it wasn't just about revenge on Keanu. The criminal organization had been systematically using people like Kyle to infiltrate the entertainment industry, leveraging their connections to gain influence over high-profile figures. They saw Keanu as a target not just because of his celebrity, but because of his reputation for doing the right thing. The bikers had tried to use Kyle to manipulate Keanu into a vulnerable position. But as the story unfolded further, it became clear that the conspiracy was far more complex than anyone had anticipated. Some of the key players behind the operation were people from Keanu's world, individuals within his inner circle who had initially appeared trustworthy but had been complicit in the criminal activities. One of Keanu's former associates, someone who had worked with him for years, had been feeding information to the criminals. This individual had played a role in the manipulation, making sure that Keanu's vulnerabilities were exposed at just the right moment. It was a bitter pill to swallow for Keanu. He had always trusted those around him, but now, the truth was undeniable. The people closest to him had betrayed him in ways that no one could have predicted. It was the final betrayal, the one he never saw coming. Keanu, however, handled it with the same grace he had shown throughout the ordeal. Rather than lash out or let anger cloud his judgment, he worked with the authorities to ensure that those responsible were brought to justice, ensuring that no stone was left unturned. With the arrest of the last few key figures in the criminal network, the conspiracy was finally dismantled. The police had successfully identified everyone involved, and the criminals who had been behind the attempts to sabotage Keanu's life were either arrested or in hiding. But even as the legal process moved forward, Keanu couldn't shake the realization that the betrayal from within his inner circle would always be a part of him. It wasn't just the bikers he had to worry about, it was the people he had trusted most. Kyle, meanwhile, was left with the wreckage of his own life. After everything that had happened, he had no choice but to face the consequences of his past actions. The public backlash against him had only worsened in light of the revelations about the criminal gang and his indirect role in it all. Although Kyle wasn't directly responsible for the larger conspiracy, his involvement with the gang, coupled with his cruel treatment of Bear, had left a permanent stain on his reputation. He tried to rebuild, tried to find redemption, but the road ahead was long and uncertain. He would never fully escape the damage done, not to himself, and certainly not to Bear. Keanu, however, emerged from the chaos with his integrity intact. The experience had changed him in profound ways, and while the pain of betrayal remained, he was resolute in his decision to never let it define him. His bond with Bear was stronger than ever, and in the quiet moments with his dog, he found solace and healing. Keanu knew that his life would never be the same, but he had learned to adapt, to move forward, and to trust in the lessons the past had taught him. The public, too, seemed to find peace with the resolution of the story. Keanu's fans, who had rallied behind him during the darkest moments, saw him not just as a victim, but as a hero in his own right, someone who had been tested by the harshest of circumstances and had come through it with dignity. They appreciated his quiet strength, his refusal to be consumed by anger or revenge. Keanu had shown them that standing up for what's right, even when it's hard, was always worth it. And in the end, Keanu knew that justice had been served, not only for Bear but for the truth itself. The criminal network that had once sought to ruin him had been exposed and dismantled. The people who had betrayed him had been held accountable. But the real victory was that he had kept his heart intact, that he had chosen love and loyalty over revenge. Keanu's journey had come full circle, and the lessons he had learned would stay with him forever. The story had ended, but the lessons lived on. It wasn't just about standing up for the ones we love, it was about understanding the consequences of our choices, the hidden dangers in the people we trust, and the lengths to which people will go when they believe they have nothing left to lose. Keanu's quiet resilience, his refusal to be broken, left a lasting impact on everyone who followed his journey. And in the end, perhaps the greatest lesson was that even in a world filled with darkness, the light of truth and love would always find a way to shine through.